Security, remove her. The words sliced through the glass-walled conference room so sharply that even the tapping keyboards outside seemed to stop. For a moment, nobody moved. Then a few quiet chuckles drifted across the polished oak table. Vanessa Carter stood perfectly still, her resume held neatly against her chest. The morning sunlight streamed through the 41st floor windows, reflecting off steel and glass, painting pale streaks across the room. She looked from one face to another. Some avoided eye contact. Others wore thin smiles. Linda Parker, the company's human resources director, leaned back in her leather chair and folded her arms. "I think we've heard enough," she said coolly. "This position requires executive-level experience, not wishful thinking." More laughter followed. Soft, controlled. The kind that hurt more because it tried not to sound cruel. Vanessa lowered her eyes briefly. Not out of embarrassment, out of restraint. She had spent years learning that dignity was often measured by the things you chose not to say. The silence stretched. Air conditioning hummed softly overhead. Somewhere down the hallway, an elevator bell chimed. Linda glanced at the security officer standing beside the door. "Escort her out, please." The officer hesitated. Vanessa simply nodded. "That won't be necessary." Her voice was calm enough to surprise everyone. She gathered her papers carefully. No trembling hands. No angry response. No attempt to defend herself. Just quiet composure. The room seemed disappointed by that. People always expected a scene, especially when they believed someone had been pushed too far. Vanessa walked toward the door in measured steps. Her modest navy blazer looked out of place among the expensive tailored suits surrounding the conference table. She knew they noticed it. She knew they noticed everything. The sensible shoes, the simple handbag, the absence of luxury labels. They had judged her before she spoke her first sentence. Maybe even before she entered the room. As the door closed behind her, the muffled laughter disappeared. The hallway felt colder, cleaner. Bright white marble stretched beneath her feet. Large framed photographs of the company's achievements lined the walls. 20 years of growth. 20 years of success. 20 years of carefully polished reputation. Vanessa paused beside one photograph showing the company headquarters at sunset. Her reflection stared back at her from the glass. Calm, collected, invisible, just the way she preferred. At least most days. She stepped into the elevator. The chrome doors slid shut. Finally alone, she released a slow breath. The elevator descended floor by floor. 41, 40, 39. Each number glowed briefly before disappearing. Her phone remained silent inside her purse. The city spread beyond the windows like a living map of steel, concrete, and ambition. Thousands of people rushing somewhere, chasing something, proving themselves to someone. By the time she reached the lobby, the sting of humiliation should have been stronger. Instead, something else occupied her thoughts. A document, a signature, a meeting scheduled later that afternoon. The elevator doors opened. Vanessa crossed the expansive marble lobby and stepped outside into the corporate courtyard. A fountain shimmered beneath the late morning sun. Water danced across polished stone while employees hurried past carrying coffee cups and laptops. Nobody noticed her. Nobody knew who she was. Nobody knew what had happened upstairs. Vanessa sat quietly on a bench beside the fountain. Then her phone vibrated. Once, the screen lit up. The name appearing there instantly changed everything. Ethan Whitmore, CEO, husband, and the one person in the entire building who had absolutely no idea what Linda Parker had just done. Vanessa stared at the glowing screen for a second before answering. Around her, employees crossed the courtyard carrying iced coffees and laptop bags, completely unaware that the woman sitting quietly beside the fountain was connected to the most powerful office in the building. "Good morning," Ethan said. His voice carried the familiar warmth that always seemed untouched by board meetings, earnings reports, or corporate politics. Vanessa smiled faintly. "Good morning. How did the interview go?" he asked. The question lingered between them. Water splashed softly from the fountain behind her. A cool breeze moved through the courtyard, carrying the scent of fresh-cut grass from the landscaped plaza. Vanessa watched sunlight ripple across the water. "It was interesting," she replied. Ethan laughed lightly. "Interesting is never a simple answer coming from you." She could have told him everything. She could have described the laughter, the dismissive glances, the assumptions made before she finished her first sentence. She could have repeated Linda Parker's words exactly as they were spoken. Instead, she looked toward the towering glass headquarters stretching nearly 600 feet into the blue sky and simply said, "I learned a lot." Ethan grew quiet for a moment. "You still have time to change your mind, you know?" Vanessa already knew what he meant. Ever since their private wedding 6 months earlier, Ethan had offered her a place beside him publicly. A larger office, a title, influence, recognition. Every time she politely declined. She wanted to be seen for who she was, not because of who she married. "No," she answered softly. "I need to do this my way." Ethan sighed. "That is one of the reasons I love you." The words warmed her more than the sunlight. After they ended the call, Vanessa slipped her phone back into her purse and sat quietly. Few people knew her story. Few people knew that before caring for her mother through years of illness, she had built a successful career analyzing corporate compliance systems. She had spent thousands of hours studying risk reports, governance structures, and executive accountability. She understood companies from the inside out. Yet none of that mattered inside the interview room. The people upstairs had seen only what they expected to see. A woman sitting across from them without status symbols, without connections, without visible power. A shadow crossed the fountain. Vanessa looked up. Several employees hurried toward the entrance, speaking nervously among themselves. Something unusual was happening. More people followed. Then another group. Conversations became whispers. Heads turned toward the revolving doors. Security personnel suddenly appeared near the lobby entrance. The atmosphere shifted, subtle at first, then unmistakable. Vanessa rose from the bench. Across the plaza, a line of black executive vehicles rolled toward the curb. The first car stopped. The second followed. Employees slowed their pace. Some stopped walking entirely. Phones disappeared into pockets. Jackets were straightened. Through the glass lobby walls, managers began moving quickly between offices. Vanessa recognized the signs immediately. An unscheduled executive intervention. Something serious had happened. Then her phone vibrated again. This time it was not Ethan. It was a message from the corporate secretary. Emergency board meeting. Attendance mandatory. Effective immediately. Vanessa read the message twice. Her expression did not change. But deep inside, she knew the day had just become far more complicated than anyone upstairs could possibly imagine. Vanessa remained standing beside the fountain for several seconds after reading the message. Around her, the atmosphere continued to shift. Employees who had been casually walking through the courtyard now moved with unusual urgency. Conversations dropped into whispers. Department managers appeared near the entrance, checking phones and exchanging concerned looks. Something had disrupted the normal rhythm of the company. Something important. Vanessa slipped her phone into her purse and started toward the building. The revolving doors turned steadily as streams of employees entered the lobby. The polished marble floors reflected the bright afternoon sunlight pouring through the 40-foot glass walls. Security personnel stood straighter than usual. Receptionists spoke in lower voices. Even the giant digital display showing stock performance seemed strangely subdued. As Vanessa crossed the lobby, she noticed several executives gathering near a private elevator reserved for senior leadership. Their faces looked tense. A man from legal carried a thick folder against his chest. Another executive from finance appeared pale as he scanned messages on his tablet. Whatever was happening had reached every corner of the building. The private elevator doors opened with a soft chime. One by one, senior leaders stepped inside. Vanessa approached just as the doors began closing. A hand stopped them. "Miss Carter." She turned. Standing behind her was Michael Reeves, the corporate secretary. His gray suit looked slightly wrinkled, an unusual detail for someone known for flawless professionalism. "You received the message?" he asked. "Yes." "Good. The board is expecting you." Vanessa studied him carefully. There was no surprise in his expression, no confusion about her presence. Unlike most people in the building, Michael knew exactly who she was. "This meeting was not on the calendar," she said. Michael glanced toward the elevators. Neither was the problem that created it. His answer lingered in the air. Together they entered the elevator. The doors closed quietly. As the elevator rose, neither spoke. Numbers illuminated one after another. 22, 23, 24. The silence felt heavier with every floor. Finally, Michael exhaled. "A financial review uncovered inconsistencies this morning." Vanessa looked toward him. "Serious?" "Potentially." He adjusted his glasses. "Several reports do not match supporting records." Vanessa felt a familiar sense of focus settle over her. For years she had worked with compliance investigations. She knew how small inconsistencies often revealed larger truths hidden underneath. "Who discovered it?" she asked. Michael hesitated. Ironically, the issue originated inside a division supervised by human resources. The elevator continued climbing. Vanessa said nothing, but Linda Parker's face immediately appeared in her mind. The confident smile, the dismissive tone, the certainty that she could judge someone's value within seconds of seeing them. The elevator reached the executive floor. The doors opened. Thick carpeting softened every footstep. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed miles of city skyline stretching into the distance. Board members, attorneys, and senior executives moved through the corridor with quiet urgency. Some carried folders. Others spoke into phones. Nobody appeared relaxed. Michael guided Vanessa toward a pair of dark walnut doors at the end of the hall. Behind them waited the main boardroom. Just before they reached it, voices emerged from inside. Raised voices, controlled but unmistakably tense. Vanessa recognized one immediately. Linda Parker. She sounded confident, defensive, determined. Michael stopped beside the doors. "The meeting begins in 2 minutes," he said. Vanessa looked through the glass panel beside the entrance. Around the long conference table sat the most powerful people in the company. None of them noticed her standing outside. None of them knew that the woman they had dismissed only hours earlier was about to walk into the center of the biggest crisis the company had faced in years. Then the boardroom doors slowly opened. The room quieted the moment Vanessa stepped inside. Not because people recognized her, but because they did not. She was an unfamiliar face entering a meeting reserved for the highest levels of leadership. The 40-foot conference table stretched beneath rows of recessed lights, its polished surface reflecting stacks of reports, open laptops, and untouched glasses of water. Beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city skyline glowed beneath the afternoon sun. Ethan Whitmore stood near the head of the table speaking with 2 board members. For a brief second, his eyes met Vanessa's. A subtle smile appeared before disappearing just as quickly beneath professional composure. Around the room, executives exchanged confused glances. Linda Parker looked especially unsettled. Her expression tightened the moment she recognized Vanessa. The same woman she had dismissed only hours earlier was now walking into one of the most restricted meetings in the company. Linda straightened in her chair. "Excuse me," she said carefully. "I believe there has been some mistake." Several heads turned toward her. Michael Reeves closed the boardroom doors behind Vanessa. The soft click echoed through the silence. "There is no mistake," he replied. Linda blinked. "Then perhaps someone can explain why she is here." Nobody answered immediately. Ethan returned to his seat at the head of the table. His calm presence filled the room without effort. The directors settled into their chairs. Papers shifted. Pens clicked. Outside, sunlight flashed against neighboring skyscrapers, casting moving reflections across the glass walls. Vanessa remained standing near the center of the room. She noticed the same faces from earlier that morning. The same executives who had watched her interview. Some suddenly seemed fascinated by their notes. Others avoided looking directly at her. Ethan folded his hands. "Let us begin." A large presentation screen illuminated at the front of the room. Financial reports appeared. Charts. Revenue summaries. Internal audit findings. The atmosphere immediately changed. What had started as confusion became concern. Several board members leaned forward. The numbers displayed on the screen revealed discrepancies that could not be ignored. Transactions failed to match supporting documentation. Budget allocations appeared inconsistent. Approval records contained unexplained irregularities. Quiet discussion spread around the table. Ethan listened without interruption. Then he looked toward Michael. "Show them the next file." Another report appeared. This one focused on internal oversight procedures, department reviews, compliance monitoring, accountability structures. Vanessa watched carefully. Every page confirmed what she had already suspected. Small inconsistencies connected together like pieces of a much larger puzzle. Across the table, Linda's confidence began to fade. She adjusted her posture repeatedly, reached for water, avoided eye contact. For the first time all day, uncertainty crossed her face. Finally, one board member spoke. "How did we miss this?" Another director shook his head. "These patterns have existed for months." Silence followed. Then Ethan turned his attention toward Vanessa. The room noticed immediately. Every eye followed his gaze. "There is someone here," he said calmly, "who reviewed similar systems for years and may offer valuable insight." Linda looked visibly confused. Several executives exchanged puzzled glances. Ethan's voice remained steady. "Vanessa, would you be willing to share your observations?" The room froze, not because of what he asked, because of who he asked. And in that moment, the same woman who had been treated like an outsider only hours earlier stepped forward toward the screen, while every executive in the room waited to hear what she would say. Vanessa walked toward the presentation screen as complete silence settled over the boardroom. The soft hum of the ventilation system seemed louder now. Every executive watched her, some with curiosity, some with confusion, a few with visible skepticism. The giant display cast pale blue light across the room as financial reports remained frozen on the screen behind her. Vanessa placed a single folder on the conference table and looked carefully at the numbers displayed before turning toward the board. Her posture remained calm, professional, unshaken, the same composure that had carried her through years of difficult decisions and long nights reviewing compliance reports. "The issue is not the discrepancies themselves," she said. "The issue is the pattern." Several board members exchanged glances. Vanessa reached for a remote and advanced the presentation. A new chart appeared. Rows of transactions connected by timelines and approval chains filled the screen. "Individually," she continued, "each inconsistency appears minor. Together, they create a system that prevents proper oversight." The room grew even quieter. One director leaned forward. Another removed his glasses and studied the screen more carefully. Vanessa highlighted a series of approvals. "Notice how these reviews repeatedly bypass secondary verification." She advanced another slide. "Then notice how exceptions receive approval through the same administrative pathway." Ethan watched without interrupting. Michael Reeves sat beside him taking notes. Across the table, Linda Parker remained motionless. Her hands rested tightly together. Vanessa continued, "This is not random. It is structural." A board member raised his hand. "How long would a pattern like this take to develop?" Vanessa glanced at the data. "Several months at minimum." Another director frowned. "And nobody reported it?" Vanessa paused briefly. "Someone may have, but the reporting process itself appears compromised." The statement landed heavily. The atmosphere shifted again. What had begun as a routine financial review now felt far more serious. Several executives started quietly reviewing documents in front of them. Others typed messages into their tablets. Vanessa advanced another slide. A flowchart appeared. Approval pathways, department oversight, internal review structures. The image looked complicated at first glance, then suddenly simple. Too simple. The same names appeared repeatedly throughout the process. The same checkpoints. The same gatekeepers. A low murmur spread around the table. One director slowly shook his head. How did we not see this? Vanessa answered honestly. Because most people only look at results. Problems usually hide inside processes. Her voice never rose, never accused, never attacked. She simply followed the facts wherever they led. That was what made her observations impossible to dismiss. Ethan finally spoke. Can the system be fixed? Vanessa looked toward him. Yes. Relief briefly appeared on several faces. Then she added, but only if the company is willing to examine uncomfortable truths. The relief disappeared. Nobody spoke. Sunlight shifted across the windows as clouds drifted above the city. The room felt smaller now, more vulnerable. Vanessa returned to the final slide. A list of departments appeared. Human resources sat near the top. Linda's expression changed immediately. It was subtle. A slight tightening around her eyes. A small movement of her jaw. But Vanessa noticed it. So did Ethan. These divisions require independent review, Vanessa said. Not because guilt has been established. Because accountability requires transparency. One board member nodded slowly. Another followed. Then a third. Momentum was beginning to build. The facts were speaking louder than titles. Louder than assumptions. Louder than status. Linda suddenly cleared her throat. With all due respect, she said carefully, we are receiving recommendations from someone who does not officially work here. The room froze. Vanessa turned toward her. Linda forced a polite smile. I am simply asking the question everyone else is thinking. Several executives looked uncomfortable. Ethan remained silent. Linda continued. Exactly what authority does she have to be advising this board? For the first time since entering the room, every eye shifted not toward the screen but toward Vanessa herself. The question lingered over the boardroom like a weight suspended in midair. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Beyond the glass walls, clouds drifted slowly across the afternoon sky, softening the sunlight that filled the room. The city below continued its endless motion, but inside the boardroom time seemed to slow. Vanessa met Linda Parker's gaze without hostility, without defensiveness, just calm attention, the same calm that had carried her through every challenge life had placed in front of her. Linda folded her hands neatly on the table. Her expression projected confidence, but beneath it sat something else now. Unease, the kind that appears when certainty begins to crack. It is a reasonable question, Linda continued. This board has responsibilities to shareholders. Expertise matters. Credentials matter. A few executives shifted in their seats. Some appeared uncertain about where the conversation was headed. Others looked relieved that someone had finally spoken what they were thinking. Vanessa nodded slightly. You are right, she said. The response surprised several people. Linda blinked. Vanessa continued. Expertise does matter. Accountability matters. Transparency matters. The room listened carefully. That is exactly why these findings deserve attention. Her voice remained steady. No anger. No attempt to score points. Just facts. The board members looked from Vanessa to the reports spread across the table and back again. Ethan remained silent, allowing the moment to unfold naturally. He knew Vanessa well enough to understand that she never rushed important truths. One director cleared his throat. Miss Carter, perhaps you can tell us more about your background. Vanessa looked toward him. For nearly a decade, I worked in corporate governance and compliance review. Several eyebrows lifted around the room. I specialized in identifying structural weaknesses that allow risk to develop unnoticed. Another board member leaned forward. Where? Vanessa answered simply. Several firms across Chicago, Atlanta, and New York. The room grew quieter. Linda's expression tightened slightly. She had expected uncertainty, hesitation, perhaps embarrassment. Instead, she found confidence grounded in experience. Vanessa walked slowly toward the windows. Sunlight reflected across the glass, illuminating the skyline beyond. Most organizations believe problems begin with bad decisions, she said. That is rarely true. Problems usually begin when people stop asking difficult questions. Nobody interrupted. The words settled into the silence. Ethan watched the directors carefully. He could see their thinking changing. Not because of authority. Not because of titles. Because of substance. Vanessa turned back toward the table. This company has extraordinary people. Extraordinary resources. Extraordinary potential. She glanced toward the reports. That is exactly why these patterns concern me. A soft tapping sound echoed as one director absent-mindedly rested a pen against the table. Another executive removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. The atmosphere had shifted again. Defensive energy was slowly giving way to reflection. Linda attempted to regain control. Even so, she said carefully, outside consultants are normally vetted before participating in confidential meetings. Her words were measured, professional, but everyone heard the challenge hidden underneath. Vanessa smiled politely. That is true. Then she returned to her seat. The movement seemed small, yet it changed the room. Confidence no longer needed to stand at the front of the screen. Confidence could sit quietly and still command attention. Ethan finally reached for a folder resting beside him. The simple motion drew every eye toward the head of the table. Michael Reeves straightened. Several board members exchanged curious looks. Linda's posture stiffened almost immediately. Ethan opened the folder slowly. The sound of paper turning seemed unusually loud. Then he looked around the room. There is additional context, he said calmly. Context that everyone here deserves to understand before this discussion continues. The room fell completely silent. Linda stared at the folder. Vanessa remained composed. And for the first time all afternoon, the balance of power inside the boardroom began to move in a direction nobody except Ethan and Vanessa could see coming. The silence that followed felt almost physical. Ethan rested both hands on the folder and slowly looked around the boardroom. No one spoke. No one interrupted. Even Linda Parker remained still, her attention fixed on the documents in front of him. Outside the windows, the afternoon light had softened into a warm golden glow, casting long reflections across the conference table. Ethan opened the folder and removed a single document. The paper itself appeared ordinary, white, simple, unremarkable. Yet the moment he placed it on the table, Michael Reeves sat a little straighter. Several board members exchanged curious looks. Ethan's voice remained calm. 6 months ago, I made a personal decision. He paused briefly. A decision I intentionally kept private. The room listened carefully. Ethan rarely spoke about his personal life. In fact, most employees knew almost nothing about it. He had spent years keeping that boundary intact. Only a handful of people inside this company were informed. He glanced toward Michael. For obvious reasons, confidentiality was important. Linda frowned slightly. Confusion was beginning to replace confidence. Ethan continued. However, the circumstances today make continued privacy impossible. A director near the far end of the table folded his hands together. Another executive slowly closed his laptop. Attention shifted completely away from the reports and onto Ethan. Vanessa remained quiet. Her expression did not change. She simply watched. Ethan picked up the document and slid it gently across the polished table toward the nearest board member. Please pass that around. The paper moved from one person to another. I scanned the page, then scanned it again. The reaction began subtly. Raised eyebrows, sudden stillness, confused expressions turning into shock. One director looked across the table toward Vanessa, then back down at the document, then back to Vanessa again. The chain reaction spread around the room. Linda watched nervously as the paper finally reached her hands. Her eyes moved across the first line, then the second. The color drained from her face. The room remained silent, but the atmosphere transformed completely. Ethan finally broke the silence. Allow me to formally introduce Vanessa Whitmore. Nobody moved. Nobody seemed capable of moving. Linda stared at the document as though it had become impossible to understand. Vanessa Whitmore. The name echoed silently through the room. Ethan's wife. The realization landed all at once. The interview, the dismissal, the assumptions, the laughter. Every moment from earlier that morning suddenly looked very different. One board member removed his glasses and exhaled slowly. Another director leaned back in disbelief. Michael remained expressionless, though even he seemed relieved that the truth no longer needed to remain hidden. Linda's hands tightened around the paper. "This is not possible," she whispered. Ethan looked toward her. "It is entirely possible." His tone remained respectful, professional, controlled. Somehow that made the moment even heavier. Linda swallowed hard. "You never announced?" "Correct," Ethan replied. "Because Vanessa requested privacy." The room turned toward Vanessa again. She sat exactly as she had before. Calm, composed, dignified, not triumphant, not angry, simply present. Ethan continued. "She never wanted special treatment. She never asked for influence. She never used my position to advance herself." He paused. "In fact, she insisted on being evaluated exactly the same as everyone else." The words settled heavily over the room. Several people lowered their eyes. They now understood what had happened. More importantly, they understood what Vanessa had chosen not to do. She could have revealed her identity during the interview. She could have ended the conversation immediately. She could have forced respect through power. Instead, she had allowed people to reveal who they truly were. Linda slowly placed the document back onto the table. For the first time all day, she seemed unable to find words. And deep inside the boardroom, surrounded by silence and golden afternoon light, the balance of power shifted completely. No one spoke for several long seconds. The boardroom remained wrapped in a silence so complete that the distant hum of city traffic beyond the windows seemed strangely loud. Linda Parker stared at the marriage certificate resting on the table. The document itself had not changed, yet everything around it had. The assumptions, the judgments, the confidence that had carried her through the morning. All of it now felt fragile. Ethan allowed the silence to settle naturally. He understood something many executives never learned. Important truths rarely needed to be repeated. They only needed space to be understood. Vanessa sat quietly with her hands folded in her lap. She felt no satisfaction watching the room struggle with the revelation. No desire to embarrass anyone. That was never why she came. One board member finally broke the silence. "You interviewed for an entry-level position?" The question sounded almost unbelievable. Vanessa nodded. "Yes." "Why?" Another director asked. "You could have walked into any office in this building." A faint smile appeared on her face. That was exactly the point. Several executives exchanged confused looks. Vanessa glanced toward the skyline beyond the glass walls. The late afternoon sun painted the buildings in shades of gold and amber. "I wanted to understand what this company looked like from the ground level," she said. "Not from the executive floor." The words landed heavily. She continued, "Companies often spend millions of dollars studying performance, efficiency, and growth. Yet they rarely examine something much more important." Nobody interrupted. "Character." The room listened carefully. Vanessa's voice remained gentle, calm, honest. The way people treat someone with no visible power reveals more than any report ever could. Across the table, several directors lowered their eyes. They knew she was right. Ethan watched quietly. Pride flickered behind his composed expression. Not because Vanessa had proven anyone wrong, because she had once again chosen integrity over advantage. Michael Reeves closed his notebook. "The board requested an independent review 6 months ago," he said. Vanessa volunteered to conduct informal observations before accepting any official role. More surprised looks appeared around the room. Linda blinked. "Official role?" Michael nodded. Ethan leaned forward slightly. "There is something else the board should know." Attention immediately returned to him. He opened another folder and removed a single page. Last night the board unanimously approved the creation of a new ethics and accountability committee. Several directors nodded. The vote had occurred after weeks of discussion. Ethan continued. The committee will operate independently of executive leadership. The significance of that statement became immediately clear. Independence meant authority, oversight, influence, real influence, not symbolic influence. Ethan placed the document on the table. The board also approved its first chairperson. No one needed to ask who. Linda's face remained completely still now. Vanessa looked almost uncomfortable receiving so much attention. Ethan smiled slightly. Vanessa accepted the position this morning. A wave of realization moved through the room. The interview, the dismissal, the irony was almost impossible to ignore. Hours earlier, she had been treated as though she needed permission to enter the company. Now the board itself had entrusted her with helping shape its future. Yet Vanessa showed no sign of triumph. No attempt to make anyone feel smaller. Instead, she looked directly at Linda. The room noticed immediately. Everyone expected confrontation, judgment, perhaps even criticism. Instead, Vanessa spoke softly. People make mistakes. Linda looked up slowly. Vanessa's expression remained kind. The important thing is what we learn from them. The words settled over the boardroom like sunlight moving across still water. And for the first time that day, the tension that had filled the room began to loosen. Not because power had changed hands, because grace had entered the conversation. The meeting ended almost an hour later, but no one rushed toward the door. The boardroom felt different now, lighter, quieter. The tension that had dominated the afternoon had given way to something more reflective. Outside, the sun was beginning its slow descent behind the skyline. Golden light stretched across the city, turning glass towers into ribbons of amber and gold. One by one, directors gathered their papers. Some paused before leaving, offering Vanessa a handshake. Others simply nodded with quiet respect. No speeches, no dramatic apologies, just small gestures that carried more meaning than words. Linda Parker remained seated long after everyone else began leaving. The conference table that had once felt like a stage for judgment now stood nearly empty. Folders had been closed. Laptops shut down. Water glasses sat untouched beneath the fading light. Ethan exchanged a final word with Michael Reeves before stepping toward the door. Then he stopped and looked back at Vanessa. Their eyes met. A soft smile passed between them. Nothing needed to be said. Ethan understood that this moment belonged to her. When the door finally closed behind him, only two people remained in the boardroom. Vanessa and Linda. Silence settled gently between them. Linda stared out at the skyline for several seconds before speaking. I thought I was good at reading people. Her voice sounded smaller than it had that morning. Vanessa listened without interrupting. Linda looked down at her hands. I convinced myself that experience gave me that ability. A faint laugh escaped her. Not amused. Regretful. Turns out I was mostly reading assumptions. The honesty surprised even her. Vanessa walked slowly toward the windows. The city below glowed beneath the approaching evening. Headlights began appearing along distant streets. Tiny streams of light moving through concrete canyons. We all carry assumptions, Vanessa said quietly. The challenge is recognizing them before they make decisions for us. Linda nodded slowly. The words were not a lecture. They felt more like an invitation to grow. After a long pause, she finally stood. Thank you, she said. Vanessa looked at her. For what? Linda exhaled. For giving me a lesson I should have learned years ago. Vanessa smiled gently. Then make it count. Linda returned the smile. Small. Genuine. Then she picked up her folder and walked toward the door. Before leaving, she paused one final time. Congratulations on the new role. Vanessa nodded. Thank you. The door closed softly behind her. And just like that, the room became still. Vanessa remained by the windows. Evening light reflected across the glass. Somewhere far below, the city continued moving at its usual pace. Millions of people chasing deadlines, opportunities, and dreams. Ethan quietly entered a few minutes later. He stepped beside her without speaking. Together they looked out across the skyline. The view had not changed. The city had not changed. Yet somehow everything felt different. Ethan gently reached for her hand. "Any regrets?" he asked. Vanessa thought about the interview, the laughter, the assumptions, the revelations. Then she slowly shook her head. No, a peaceful silence followed. The last rays of sunlight slipped beyond the horizon. Office lights flickered on throughout the city. Ethan squeezed her hand lightly. "You know," he said, "most people would have handled today very differently." Vanessa smiled. "That is exactly why they should not be leading the ethics committee." Ethan laughed softly. The sound echoed through the nearly empty boardroom. Warm, honest, human. For a while neither of them spoke again. They simply stood together watching the city transition from day to night. And as darkness settled beyond the glass, one truth remained brighter than any light below. Respect earned through power fades quickly. Respect earned through character lasts long after the room grows quiet.